the end of 1974, Quoc Dong was chosen by the Liberation Army not because it was a densely populated area or possessed great economic value, but because it carried a particularly important strategic significance. Located approximately 120 kilometers north of Saigon, Quoc Dong functioned as a forward outpost of Military Region 3, controlling Highway 14, the vital transportation artery linking the Central Highlands and Cambodia with the southeastern region. Within the defensive system of the Republic of Vietnam, Quoc Dong was expected to serve as a forward shield, protecting Saigon from strategic directions of attack. More importantly, Quoc Dong was selected as a trial by fire to test the reactions of the opposing side and external powers. The Liberation Army sought to determine whether the Republic of Vietnam would dare to deploy its strategic reserve forces, such as airborne or marine divisions, to conduct a relief operation, and at the same time to probe the likelihood of renewed U.S. military intervention. If Quoc Dong were to fall without a decisive response from Saigon and Washington, it would signal that the enemy's strategic defensive line had begun to crumble, and that the door to Saigon had been effectively opened. For this reason, Quoc Dong became a test of decisive significance for the overall course of the war. In nominal terms, the forces of the Republic of Vietnam in Military Region 3 were by no means weak. The three corps controlled several main divisions, including the 5th, 18th, and 25th Divisions, along with armored brigades, ranger units, and airborne special forces. However, this strength existed largely on organizational charts and in staff reports. In reality, on the battlefield of Quoc Dong, the defensive forces were extremely thin and lacked the capacity to adapt or reverse the situation. Directly responsible for the defense of Quoc Dong were only 5 regional forces battalions, scattered popular forces platoons, and a local artillery battalion under the command of Colonel Do Kong Thang. These units were suitable for maintaining local security, but were entirely insufficient to confront a large-scale offensive campaign. The great distance from Saigon, the rugged, mountainous terrain, and the long and vulnerable supply routes made reinforcements slow and absolutely dependent on decisions from higher command. Although General Du Quoc Dong, commander of 3 corps, possessed considerable mobile forces, he was not granted the authority to deploy them proactively. Any proposal to move main divisions or strategic reserve units required approval from President Nguyen Van Thieu, and was repeatedly rejected. As a result, the numerical and material superiority of the Republic of Vietnam existed only on paper, while at Quoc Dong, the defensive forces were left to face alone the overwhelming offensive power of the Liberation Army. The defeat at Quoc Dong cannot be explained solely by the imbalance of forces on the ground, but rather stemmed from deeper errors in the strategic thinking of President Nguyen Van Thieu. In the final months of 1974, Thieu adopted a highly centralized command model in which control over the deployment of main and reserve forces was firmly concentrated in the president's hands. This approach was intended to avoid being misled by diversionary tactics, but it inadvertently eliminated the flexibility and responsiveness of field commanders. As the situation at Quoc Dong grew increasingly serious, General Du Quoc Dong repeatedly proposed deploying the 5th or 18th Division to relieve the siege, or at least authorizing the commitment of a sufficiently strong force to regain the initiative. However, all such proposals were rejected by President Thieu on the grounds that the defensive perimeter around Saigon had to be preserved and other potential directions of attack anticipated. This hesitation reduced relief efforts to symbolic, piecemeal measures that were insufficient to bring about any meaningful change on the battlefield. More notably, President Thieu continued to believe that the United States would not allow Quoc Dong to fall into the hands of the Liberation Army. This assumption caused him to delay committing the strategic reserves and to underestimate both the determination and the scale of the enemy offensive. When the United States did not intervene at all, prolonged hesitation turned Quoc Dong into a sacrificial pawn, where the defending forces were abandoned while the highest command remained locked in a passive defensive posture. The consequence of this centralized and indecisive command style was paralysis within the command system of the Republic of Vietnam. Field commanders had troops but no authority, while strategic decisions were slow and inconsistent. This error not only led to the loss of Quoc Dong, but also shattered confidence throughout the armed forces, paving the way for a chain of subsequent defeats. The Route 14 Quoc Dong campaign was conducted by the Liberation Army following a classic offensive method, advancing from the outer perimeter toward the center, gradually isolating and neutralizing the enemy's ability to reinforce and command before delivering the decisive blow. This approach not only matched the actual balance of forces, but also fully exploited the confusion and rigidity within the command structure of the Republic of Vietnam. In the initial phase, beginning in mid-December 1974, Liberation Army units concentrated on attacking outer defensive positions such as Bu Dang, Bu Na, Bo Duc, Duc Phong, and Don Luan. These positions constituted key links in the northern defensive line of Quoc Dong. As they fell one by one, strategic transportation routes, especially Highway 4 and its feeder roads, were rapidly severed, leaving Quoc Dong town and the district capital of Phuoc Binh completely isolated. Meanwhile, the Republic of Vietnam forces could only mount localized resistance, without sufficient reinforcements to counterattack and regain the initiative. After the collapse of the outer defensive line, the Liberation Army moved into the second phase, focusing on Phuoc Binh and Ba Ra Mountain. The capture of Ba Ra Mountain was decisive, as it was the most important observation and artillery adjustment point in the area. Once this position fell, the artillery system of the Republic of Vietnam in the town was virtually neutralized, while Liberation Army heavy artillery could accurately strike key targets in the center of Phuoc Dong. From early January 1975, the encirclement of the town tightened steadily. Airlift efforts by the Republic of Vietnam encountered major obstacles due to dense anti-aircraft fire, and most airdropped supplies fell into enemy hands. With the battlefield space fully controlled, the morale of the defending troops collapsed rapidly. The general assault launched at dawn on January 6, 1975, took place in a context where the enemy's command and supply capabilities had already been exhausted. After only a few hours of fighting, key command facilities were captured, defensive forces disintegrated, and the entire province of Phuoc Dong officially came under the control of the Liberation Army. The course of the campaign demonstrates that this was not an accidental victory, but the result of a methodical offensive plan that waited for the right moment and gradually choked the opponent until resistance was no longer possible. Following strategic errors at the highest level of leadership in the Republic of Vietnam, the Route 14 Phuoc Dong campaign entered its decisive phase, with conditions becoming increasingly unfavorable for the defending forces. The Liberation Army deliberately organized the campaign according to the principle of steady advances, taking one step at a time, with the destruction of the outer defensive line, prerequisite before attacking the center. This approach minimized losses while fully exploiting the opponent's passivity and delayed reactions. The first phase of the campaign, beginning in mid-December 1974, focused on peripheral strongpoints such as Bu Dang, Bu Nuc, Duc Phong, and especially Don Luan, one of the most fortified positions in the Phuoc Dong defensive system. These targets were not merely defensive in nature, but also played crucial roles in transportation and logistics links between Phuoc Dong and surrounding areas. When these outer positions fell, the entire defensive network collapsed in a chain reaction. Highway 14 and auxiliary routes were cut, leaving Phuoc Dong town and Phuoc Binh district completely isolated, with no possibility of receiving ground reinforcements. Meanwhile, the Republic of Vietnam was unable to organize large-scale counterattacks due to the lack of authorization to deploy main forces. Defensive units were forced into a passive posture, simultaneously resisting attacks and waiting for uncertain reinforcements from the rear. This prolonged waiting quickly eroded morale, especially as air support and supply efforts were limited and insufficient to alter the balance of the battlefield. Entering the second phase, the Liberation Army concentrated its main thrust on Phuoc Binh and the Ba Ra Mountain area. Capturing Ba Ra Mountain was of exceptional tactical and operational importance, as it was a key artillery observation position controlling Phuoc Long town and surrounding areas. Once this high ground was secured, the command and firepower system of the Republic of Vietnam was effectively paralyzed. Liberation Army artillery could then strike critical targets with precision, while the opponent lost the ability to adjust fire or conduct effective counter-battery operations. The encirclement of the town grew ever tighter. Supply routes were cut, most airdrop supplies fell into enemy hands, and the Republic of Vietnam Air Force faced serious difficulties against dense anti-aircraft defenses. With the battlefield fully controlled, the defending forces were isolated both materially and psychologically. At dawn on January 6, 1975, the Liberation Army launched a general assault from multiple directions. In a context where the defensive system had been severely eroded, key positions were rapidly overrun, defensive forces disintegrated, and the command structure collapsed within a short time. The entire course of the campaign shows that the defeat of the Republic of Vietnam at Phuoc Long was not the result of a single battle, but the inevitable outcome of a calculated process of gradual. Once logistics, command, and morale were systematically stripped away, the collapse of Phuoc Long became only a matter of time. The fall of Phuoc Long was not merely the outcome of a military campaign, but also produced far-reaching consequences across three dimensions: military, political, and psychological. The convergence of these three factors transformed Phuoc Long from a local defeat into a strategic turning point in the overall war. Militarily, the Republic of Vietnam suffered heavy losses. Of more than 5,000 officers and soldiers involved in the defense, only a small fraction managed to withdraw to the rear. The rest were killed or captured. The entire defensive system of a strategically important province was wiped out in a short time. Particularly serious was the large quantity of weapons and ammunition captured by the Liberation Army, including tens of thousands of large-caliber artillery shells. This constituted an extremely important logistical gain at a time when the Liberation Army faced supply difficulties, directly enhancing its combat capabilities for subsequent campaigns. Politically, the loss of Phuoc Long delivered a severe shock to the Saigon government. The credibility of the leadership was seriously undermined when the pledge to hold at all costs was not matched by concrete action. The event also clearly exposed tensions between the central leadership and field commanders, as those directly engaged in combat were placed in positions without decision-making authority. At the same time, the reaction of the United States after the fall of Phuoc Long carried special significance. Washington limited itself to statements of monitoring the situation and undertook no military intervention. This confirmed a reality that many Republic of Vietnam generals had tried to deny, that the United States would not return to the Vietnam War by force. The psychological impact of the Phuoc Long event was even more profound. For the armed forces and society of the Republic of Vietnam, this defeat shattered the last vestiges of belief in external rescue. Troop morale declined sharply, and feelings of abandonment and distrust toward the command spread widely. Many units began to fight in a passive defensive mindset, lacking confidence in any long-term objective. Conversely, for the Liberation Army, the victory at Phuoc Long provided an enormous psychological boost. The triumph not only reinforced confidence in its own military strength, but also confirmed critical strategic assessments: that the Republic of Vietnam had seriously weakened and that the United States would not intervene again. As a result, strategic determination was elevated to a new level, shortening south from an expected 2 years to just 1. Phuoc Long thus became the starting point for a series of decisive victories in the spring of 1975. In the entire Phuoc Long narrative, if one must identify a representative image of the tragic collision between individual responsibility and a rigid power structure, General Du Quoc Dong embodies it. He was neither the architect of strategy nor the ultimate decision-maker, yet he bore the most direct and severe consequences of the defeat. As commander of 3 Corps, General Du Quoc Dong was nominally responsible for the Phuoc Long area. In reality, however, his command authority was severely constrained by President Nguyen Van Thio's centralized control. Critical decisions, such as troop deployments, counterattacks, or withdrawals, required approval from the central leadership. In the context of a rapidly unfolding, intense, and fluid campaign, this delay rendered military responses passive and often meaningless. General Dong was placed in a position where he was held responsible for defending the area, but lacked the authority necessary to fulfill that responsibility. His tragedy lay not in personal incompetence, but in becoming the frontline bearer of a system that functioned incorrectly. When Quoc Dong fell, a specific individual was needed to shoulder the blame, and General Quoc Dong became the convenient choice. His swift removal after the defeat served not only to punish an individual, but also to conceal systemic errors at higher levels. Within this political logic, the individual was sacrificed to preserve the image of the central authority. From this perspective, Quoc Dong was not a failed general in the conventional sense, but a victim of a command system that permitted neither mistakes nor initiative. He was trapped between the demand to hold at all costs and the reality of lacking the necessary resources to do so. When the battlefield collapsed, punishment fell upon the local commander, while life and death strategic decisions went unexamined. This tragedy reflects a deeper problem within the Republic of Vietnam in the final phase of the war: the imbalance between power and responsibility. When all decision-making authority was concentrated at the top, while responsibility was pushed downward, failure became inevitable. Figures like General Quoc Dong were swept into that vortex, becoming scapegoats for a system already decaying from within. Looking back at Quoc Dong, the tragedy of General Quoc Dong was not merely the tragedy of an individual military officer, but a microcosm of the structural crisis of power within an entire regime in its final days. The Quoc Dong campaign, on the surface, appeared to be merely the capture of a border provincial capital. In historical depth, however, it was a strategic fracture point, where multiple latent trends of the war simultaneously emerged and converged. Quoc Dong did not immediately change the overall situation, but it confirmed that the situation had changed irreversibly. First, the campaign revealed the systemic collapse of the Republic of Vietnam. It was not merely a lack of troops, ammunition, or air support, but more critically, the absence of a flexible and credible command mechanism. From the central leadership to the battlefield, a wide gap existed between political directives and military realities. Errors were no longer isolated incidents, but repeated outcomes of an overburdened centralized system. Second, Quoc Dong served as a decisive test of the United States' response, and the result of this test carried strategic significance far beyond the battlefield. Washington's silence completely erased any assumption of renewed intervention. From that point onward, the balance of determination tilted decisively to one side. The attacking force was confident that it could advance farther, faster, and more decisively. Finally, the Quoc Dong campaign demonstrated that in the final stage of the war, psychological and political factors had surpassed purely military calculations. The loss of a provincial capital triggered the collapse of confidence, fighting spirit, and legitimacy. For this reason, Quoc Dong was not merely the end of a campaign, but the opening chapter of the chain of events leading to the spring of 1975, swift, powerful, and unstoppable.